Welcome to Train Signal. My name is Mel Haynes and you're watching SQL Server 2008. In this video, we're looking at common SQL Server commands. Throughout most of the videos, we've done everything via the GUI, which is a great way to go. But you're going to find that there's a few things you just don't have access to through the GUI. And some of the administrative tasks that I'm going to point you to in this video are much more commonly performed via the commands. So I want to focus on a couple of them. Going to look at the database console commands, or DBCC. And I want to look at the sp_configure. Now, you could take these commands and possibly slide them under administrative tasks, topics, under headings, under the SQL Server world. But, like I said, I covered most of that stuff via the GUI. In this video, the goal is simply to introduce you to the commands and show you some of the unique things they can do, because you will run across them. I want to take away the mystery. That was one of the things I discovered with SQL Server. There was these mysterious commands that would show up from time to time as I was learning the environment. And it's nice to have that kind of, brushed away as early as possible. So that's the goal. If you go to the Microsoft website, which we are going to do shortly, you can search for DBCC Transact SQL, I believe is the exact title, and you can find this exact same information here, where they've taken the family of DBCC commands and broken them up into four main categories. Because as I said, it's not a single command, it's an entire family of database console commands. The first category is going to focus on administrative maintenance tasks that you can perform on databases. Moving files around, truncating files, things of that nature. The second category is going to focus on other miscellaneous tasks, such as turning something on, turning something off. I thought it was interesting they took and stuck removing a DLL from memory under the miscellaneous tasks. If you've ever had to work with a dynamic link library, especially if you're developing your own, you go to run it, it loads it in RAM, and it doesn't work, so you have to get it out again. It's not a trivial task all the time. So we have a specific DBCC command for removing that dynamic link library from RAM again. And that's just one case where you have to get it out. Informational DBCC commands. Anything that will display information about the status of a database or a table or a file system. And then validation. Is the file system still, does it have integrity? Is the database integrity in place? And it does things of that nature on tables, indices, catalogs, which we spoke about in a different video, file groups, as well as other things associated with data structures of SQL Server. But with that, let's jump over to the Microsoft Books Online website and kind of delve into this a little bit more. So I'm at the msdn.microsoft.com homepage. It's going to msdn.microsoft.com. And I want to look at the DBCC commands. Let's give it that for a search in English. And not check DB. I want the generic. Those are specific ones. I want just DBCC Transact SQL. I think that's it there. And it is indeed. But once again, there's those same four categories I talked about. Like I said, Microsoft provided that. But I'll scroll down here to another section I want to point out. It also gives you a list of the various DBCC commands and where they fit in the different categories, which is kind of cool. So your informational statements are here. Your validation statements, and as you can see, I've been to CheckDB and CheckTable recently, and I want to actually talk about those in a second. So here, let me go ahead and just go on CheckTable. Let's click there, and you can see a little bit about it. But CheckTable gives you information. I'll give it a table name, right, or a view, either one of those. Right? I'll give it that, and then it'll give me a myriad of things about a table. I can give it other pieces of information as well. But down here in the results, it'll give me things such as the number of rows, number of pages. It repeats the table name. So helpful information when checking on the integrity of a table. DB Check Database does everything DB Check Table does and more. So it'll give you the same information for all the tables in your database, as well as lots of other information about the system views. So let's scroll back up. Let's back up a little bit. And I want to go directly to CheckDB. And actually, notice that it even says here, it runs your check table. It also runs a couple of other commands as well, your catalogs and your allocations. It'll check all of that for you in that one command. Simply give it a database name, or you can also go with a database ID and other parameters. But here, let's actually go over and do it. So I'm going to jump over to my server and we'll run those. So go Start, bring up SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm currently logged in as MDM, so that should do good. In my case, my MDM account is a domain account that I've added to my server. Click Connect. So I'm logging in using Windows authentication still. And double check to make sure I have my databases in place here. That's some others I've been playing around with, but we're still working primarily with the Veronica's database. Once again, if at any point you don't have that or you've trashed it beyond usability, just grab the script for that chapter, even a prior chapter for what we're doing right now. You can rerun that and you get that database back with the tables. I have one of the older ones here because you may recall in one of the videos we actually went into some security stuff where we created additional schemas. But here's one of the ones I created before schemas, because what I'm going to do right now really won't matter. I just want to do a general integrity check of the database. Okay, so open a new query window and dbcc check table. Open parens, square brace, and my table names are, let's grab the order table. DBO, give it the schema, even though it's the default schema. Closing square brace, F5 to run it, and I can see the number of rows in the table and the number of physical pages it takes up for that database. And other than that, there's really no problems with the table. So it actually just gives me execution completed. And if error messages had occurred, you'd have to contact yourself as a system administrator, right? Now, if I do the same thing with check database, here, let me just add that under here. And actually check DB, sorry. And we only want that command this time. F5 again. Gives me a little more information than before. Service broker, anything related to service broker. Now, I'm not running service broker. Let's give you a little more screen real estate there. Close that out. But notice with my service broker stuff, conversation priorities analyzed 0, remote service binding 0, etc., etc., etc. But if I was using service broker, which is just a messaging service for SQL Server, I would get detailed information about my service broker status. So what are the endpoints that are out there and they've been analyzed, and any conversation groups that I have in place, or remote service bindings, all that kind of stuff would all be listed in one place, which is kind of nice. Any message types. Now there are some default message types, so it's showing that it analyzed the 14 default message types, because I haven't configured Service Broker at all on this server, other than just a basic install. I haven't touched it otherwise. After I get past that, I start getting into some views and or tables, even system views and system tables. So here's an example of a sys table, the sys RS Collins table or sys row set table. Gives me information such as number of rows and number of pages for that. So just like it did for my other tables. And if I keep scrolling down, I can eventually get to the stuff that I've created. So there's my order detail table, number of rows, number of pages, and no other errors. It's saying, hey, it looks good. It's got a certain number of rows, certain number of pages, and I'm sorry I said tables, but I meant pages, and no other problems with it. SysQ messages, nothing in those. I'm not using those. Those are once again some system tables. If there were problems with it, it would show it. And then finally, I believe we did orders before, and there's my order table again. So it really reran the same command plus others. But these are going to be very commonly used for doing a quick analysis of the integrity of a database or the integrity of a table. So they're very commonly used, good to know. And in general, the DBCC category of family of commands is something to be somewhat familiar with, because there's a few different things in there you're going to come across from time to time. Setting server configuration options, SP configure. So when we're talking about SP configure, we're not talking about Management Studio, but to tie it into what we've talked about so far, Management Studio is your graphical user interface, your point and click option for configuring SQL Server. It's opposed to your command line method using the stored procedure SP_configure. If you were to, and for those of you who are typing phobic, well, you're going to have to get over it, because when you start moving into SP configure, you're saying I want to do my configuration of SQL Server using the command line, using text. Now this isn't actually configuring anything yet. This is simply showing us what's there. If you go to the configurations table, you can see a list of all the options that SP Configure can change for you. But let's talk about this code here. Select star. It says basically select everything, followed by where to pull it from sys.configurations, where sys is a schema, and then configurations is a table under that schema. We talked about that in one of the other videos. And then the other stuff is extra. You don't have to have it, but I'm saying order it by, put the information in alphabetical order based on the name of the configuration option. All right? So let's actually do that. Switch over to the server. So start SQL Server Management Studio. Go ahead and connect. Full screen it for readability. Bring up a new query window and select everything from SYS, give it a dot, configurations, gives me the table name. I can press tab to fill that in, which is kind of nice. Order by name, press F5 to run that, and we'll make it a little bigger. Pull that up a bit. And there's a list of all 68 configuration options. See, 68 rows pulled back. So things such as my C2 audit mode. If you were to look at the security video, we get into C2 audit mode. By default, it is off. I've been playing around with my system, so it's actually turned on currently. Or backup compression, or cursor threshold value. So a lot of different things in here. Default language, default trace. We actually dealt with default trace when we were looking at some of the performance capabilities of SQL Server. So this is simply showing me what's there. Now how do I go about changing it? Let's jump over and do that. I'll bring this down a hair. And before we actually type anything though, let's backtrack. I'm going to take you to a Microsoft website and talk a little bit more about the command first, and then let's go ahead and run it. So let's jump over to my browser. So here's MSDN. Just go to msdn.microsoft.com. That's my actual start page right now. And if I go to Setting, Server, Configuration, Options, and there it is on the drop down actually. Hit that, and at the top of the list, in my case, I get Setting Server Configuration Options, and it talks about a few things we're going to cover as well, but I want to jump to the list. Here's your Configuration Options table. It's really just the same stuff we saw a second ago in the Configurations table. Right, where I can see my access check cache bucket count or access check cache quota, lots of different options. It lists the minimum value, the maximum value, and the default. And the legend here of A equals advanced options, and that's key to note. We'll show that in a second when we get back to this here, show advanced options. RR, options requiring a restart of the database. So when you change some of this, you have to restart the database. Some of them are self-configuring. SQL Server is changing them dynamically for you. That's something else to keep in mind. We'll talk about that a bit more in a second. But so if we go down and let's say grab CLR enabled or C2 audit mode, there's those configuration options, and once again in the parentheses you have the A for advanced, the RR for saying restart is required. So given that, let's do a CLR enabled command. So I'm going to switch back over to the server, and now from my server to disable it, I will set it to 0. To enable it, I will set it to 1. Since I've already enabled mine, I'll just highlight that, and I'll notice once again I'm running more than one SQL statement, or I shouldn't say that. I'm running only one SQL statement, but I have more than one SQL statement currently available in the window. You can tell SQL Server to only run one of them by highlighting that one first and then pressing F5 or hitting execute. It can be a little confusing or very handy, depends on how you look at it. And now I've done that, the next thing I need to do, and it actually reminds me down here in the messages, make sure you run the reconfigure statement to actually install it, as it puts it. And what it's really doing is SQL Server has two columns where it's tracking information. One column has the latest value that you've assigned. A second column has the actual value that it's using. And in some cases it can automatically copy the value from the first column to the second without a restart. In other cases, it can't, and that's why some of those are listed in the chart we just saw with an RR. In those cases, it needs a restart to copy that stuff over. So if I want to finish this out, I would need a reconfigure, and I'll just highlight that alone and press an F5 to run it. So now the command was completely executed, completely changed. All right? Flipping back over to our web browser, we looked at CLR enabled. C2 audit mode, let's do that one as well. This one requires something else, an A and a restart. Let's go back up to the A, talk about that a little bit. A stands for the advanced options. Before you can change any of the advanced options, configuration options, and there's quite a few listed here, you first have to run what's known as a show advanced options SP configure statement. And let's run that. SP_configure, and I literally run show advanced options, single quote, comma, give it a 1, once again reconfigure, highlight those, F5, so I've told it to show advanced options using the same thing, SP_configure, C2 audit mode, 0 would turn it off, a 1 would turn it on. I'm going to turn it off. I've actually turned it on earlier, so just turn it off. And once again, a reconfigure. Now, in a lot of the Microsoft documentation, you're going to see it written this way, with a go here and a go there. You can actually get away with leaving those out. So I'm kind of taking the shortcut method, leaving that out. I'm just going to run both of those. Once again, highlight just that, F5 to run it, and I have changed it from a 1, so it was enabled, to a 0. It's not enabled. Now in this case though, the job isn't done until I actually do a reboot. You wouldn't necessarily know that from just looking at the message you got back while setting it in SQL Server, but you'll need to know that by looking at the list and determining which ones require a reboot. So with that, let's move back over to our slides and continue on. So we've talked about Management Studio versus SP_configure. We've looked at the command you can run to actually query the database to see what the current values of all your configuration settings are by going to sys.configurations and querying that table. We talked about show advanced options, and I showed you how to do it. I want to point this out one more time. Anytime you're changing any configuration option that is listed as advanced, you have to first use SP_configure to enable the show advanced options option, so to speak. You do that by setting it to 1. 1 is always on. Well, I shouldn't say always, but 90% of the time, and in most of these cases, 1 stands for on, 0 stands for off. One other thing to note out, and you may even notice this in my information as well as some of Microsoft's. I'm sometimes inconsistent here, unfortunately, but this last number here, you may have in some of my videos seen me put a single quote around this number. In some cases I didn't. That's actually because SQL Server is inconsistent. It'll take it either way, and sometimes I forget to take it out or forget to put it in. But for this last part here, it'll take it as text or as an integer, just FYI, in case you see that and wonder which way is right. There is really no preference there. And I'm saying here, use master and go, because that's actually a configuration setting against the master database. So once again, if I want to change something such as, say, the fill factor, that's considered an advanced feature. I need to do the show advanced options, setting it to 1 first, to reconfigure on that, like I'm showing here, and then I can do an SP_configure fill factor. And what is fill factor, right? Well, going back to the website. Here, let's pull it up. So back in my browser, if I go to fill factor is really just managing how SQL Server utilizes data, more specifically pages. How much information does it save in a page? How much space does it leave free in a page? So for those of you who've never dealt with databases at that level, that's fine. We're not going to get into too much with that level of detail. But suffice it to say, within the Windows environment, there's a concept of a data page, and you store so much information within a page. And here's kind of at a high level what's going on. If you can store related information in the same page, you can improve performance. Because if information is needed from 3 different pages, It's not all in the same location basically, so you have to go to multiple locations to get it. That's a real high level, poor man's explanation, as my grandpa would say, of paging, right? So you can control at that level of detail how SQL Server is storing information by setting what's known as the fill factor. How much blank space do you leave within a page? And by leaving some extra space, later on, if you need to add more related information to what's already in a page, you can add it to the same page by leaving some space for it. So it's one of those planning things that you do when you're laying out your database design. Okay? So, but once again, the point was not so much database design as is what are some of the cool things you can do with sp_configure. So some final things with sp_configure. First of all, you always run either the reconfigure or, I didn't mention this before, reconfigure with override after setting a configuration option. What's the difference? Reconfigure with override says, hey, I'm demigod, do it no matter what. Well, kind of, sort of. You can actually use the second one, reconfigure with override, all the time, but use with extreme caution. SQL Server has lots of stop gaps or breaks along the way to keep you from basically shooting yourself in the foot. And with some of these options, the ramifications are significant enough that you can't just say reconfigure. It's a safety measure. You have to say reconfigure with override. My suggestion is, if it requires a reconfigure with override, don't change it until you've thoroughly looked at that particular option. Once again, there's only about 68 of them. Until you've thoroughly looked at that particular option and what the ramifications of that option are in your environment. If you are a senior DBA and you've got other DBAs working under you who are maybe less senior, my suggestion is they shouldn't be using reconfigure with override ever. You want to pass that one up to somebody who's had a little more hands-on experience in your database environment. And then last on the list, reconfigure actually executes inside of what's known as a transaction. Now, for those of you who've done anything with SQL programming before, you're probably familiar with the concept of a transaction, but for those of you who haven't, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's say you're adding a new employee to your database system. And adding a new employee is a combination of adding them to a payroll system, adding them to a projects management system, adding them to various other, let's say you have an online learning management system, and you need to add them to each one of those systems. And let's say someone's created a user interface that automatically adds them to all those separate database systems. Well, one of the three is down on a particular day or moment you go to add a new employee. So you can only add them to the two, and they never get added to the third one. And the way your business is set up, that's a big deal. It's a big problem. And you'd really rather have all or nothing. You don't want partial. So with transactions, you can say, hey, Mr. SQL Server, if any part of my set of transactions fails, roll back the ones that succeeded so that they're all uncompleted. I don't want half the job done. I want all or nothing. Well, reconfigure automatically uses that technology, the transaction technology, so that everything that reconfigure has to do to update your configuration settings is done or not done. It's never half done. So that's a good thing. So with that, here let's jump to a wrap up. What did we talk about? In this video, two basic things, kind of related. We took you away from the GUI. We're taking the mouse away from you and making you use the keyboard. And the benefit there, you get a little bit more control. You have a little bit more power as far as what you can do in the SQL Server environment. So we looked at database console commands. We're doing various types of configuration settings and administrative tasks. And we looked at sp_configure. And over here it actually says more of what those two things do. With dbcc, database configuration commands, allows you to do various administrative things and validation of things, validating the integrity of a database or a table or an index and things of that nature. And then sp_configure, we use that in place of, or in addition to maybe, your server manager for configuring SQL Server. And the benefit, it allows you to do some things that you can't necessarily get to with Management Studio. So with that, we come to the end of our SQL Server 2008 Common Commands. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.